The cameras were live, the crowd buzzing, and Jimmy Kimmel introduced his guest with an unusually tense grin. "Please welcome Stephen Colbert." The audience erupted. Cheers, applause, whistles. It wasn't often that two late-night giants shared the same stage. But within seconds, the excitement turned into something else entirely. Colbert walked out with his trademark smirk, shook Jimmy's hand a little too firmly, and leaned in just enough to whisper something that made Jimmy's jaw tighten. They sat. The applause faded, and before Jimmy could even start his first question, Colbert leaned back in his chair and fired the opening shot. "Well, I'm just glad the show's still here, Jimmy. Honestly, I thought I'd be doing this interview in the ruins." The audience gasped, then laughed nervously. Jimmy forced a chuckle, but his eyes narrowed. The clash had begun live before the interview had even started. Jimmy adjusted his cue cards, his smile stiff. "You know, Stephen, it's nice of you to come by. I wasn't sure you'd make the trip. What with you being so busy running your own show." Colbert crossed his legs, his smirk widening. "Well, I figured I should come see you while I still can. These things don't last forever, Jimmy." The crowd chuckled, some clapping, others groaning. Jimmy's laugh was tight, unconvincing. "Funny guy," he muttered. "You always were good at writing eulogies." Colbert raised his eyebrows theatrically, tilting his head toward the crowd. "Oh, you hear that? He's still got some fight in him. That's good. I was worried you'd lost it during your— What was it? Network timeout?" The audience roared, half in laughter, half in shock. Jimmy's smile faltered. He shuffled his cards again, gripping them harder than before. "Yeah, well, still standing. Not everyone can say the same, huh?" Colbert leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Still standing? Barely. I mean, if this place were a hospital, you'd be in intensive care with the plug half pulled." The crowd howled. Some gasped. Jimmy's face turned red. He tried to laugh it off, slapping his desk. "You've been saving those, haven't you? Just sitting in your office writing Jimmy Kimmel roast jokes," Colbert shrugged. "What can I say? I like to come prepared. Besides, you make it easy," the audience clapped wildly. The atmosphere was no longer playful. It was charged, sharp, buzzing with the sense that something unscripted and real was happening. Jimmy straightened his tie, his smirk slipping. "So, Stephen, are you here to talk about your show or just to sit here and take shots at mine?" Colbert grinned wider.
Why not both?
The crowd erupted again, some cheering, others groaning, the tension boiling higher. Jimmy tried to regain control, turning to his notes. "All right, but Colbert cut him off, his voice slicing through the applause. "No, let's talk about you. How does it feel knowing you were one boardroom vote away from being replaced by reruns of Friends?" The crowd gasped. Jimmy froze. His mouth opened, then closed, his forced laugh trembling in the air. He tapped his papers on the desk, his knuckles white. "Feels fine, Stephen. At least I don't have to stand on stage every night pretending to laugh at my own jokes." The audience shrieked, clapping, gasping, some shouting. Colbert leaned back, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Oh, you are awake. Good. I was worried the producers had given you a sedative." The band sat frozen. The producers off-camera waved nervously, signaling the crew to keep rolling. This wasn't on the script, but it was ratings gold. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, waiting for the next blow. Jimmy leaned in, his voice low, his smile gone. "You come into my house and disrespect me? That's how you're gonna play it?" Colbert didn't blink. He tilted his head, his grin sharp. "Better than watching you play host while the walls crumble." The room erupted again. Some fans cheered, some booed, but no one stayed quiet. The tension was unbearable. What was supposed to be a triumphant return was already spiraling into humiliation, and both men knew it. The studio atmosphere shifted fast. This wasn't the typical lighthearted sparring late-night TV thrived on. Stephen Colbert wasn't easing into polite conversation, and Jimmy Kimmel wasn't laughing like he usually did. Every word carried edge. Every pause carried tension. Jimmy tapped his cards again, trying to keep composure. "So, Stephen," he said tightly, "you've been doing late night for years now. How does it feel, coming on my show, sitting in my chair, knowing you're usually the one asking the questions?" Colbert leaned back, folding his arms. His smirk widened. "Honestly, Jimmy, it feels like visiting a haunted house. You can still see the furniture, but you know it's all about to collapse." The audience gasped, then erupted in nervous laughter. Jimmy forced a chuckle, but his eyes narrowed. "Cute," he muttered. "You've been rehearsing that one in the mirror?" Colbert leaned forward, his voice sharp. "No, Jimmy. I don't have to rehearse when the punchline writes itself." The crowd roared again. Jimmy's forced smile slipped, his jaw tightening. He leaned forward, stabbing his finger lightly on the desk. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Colbert didn't blink. "I don't have to think it. Look at them." He gestured to the crowd, who broke into wild applause. Jimmy's eyes flicked to the audience, then back to Colbert, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, at least my audience shows up for me, not just to watch me pretend to be a character every night." The shot landed. The crowd erupted in gasps, some clapping, some booing. Colbert raised his eyebrows, leaning back slowly, his grin never fading. "Oh, that's good. You almost sounded like a comedian just now." The laughter hit again, sharper this time. Jimmy's face reddened. He slammed his cards down on the desk, the smack echoing across the studio. "You want to sit here and take shots at me all night? Is that why you came? Because if that's the game, I can play it too." Colbert leaned in, his glasses catching the lights. "Jimmy, you're already playing. The problem is, you're losing." The audience shrieked, clapping, cheering, some shouting. The atmosphere was electric, dangerous, like a live wire sparking in the room. Jimmy's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his mug, sipping water he didn't need, trying to regain composure. "All right," Jimmy said finally, his voice low but tight. "Let's move on before you embarrass yourself further." Colbert laughed loud, sharp. "Oh no, Jimmy. The only embarrassment here is you, trying to act like you've still got control." The room exploded. Cheers, boos, claps, chaos. Jimmy leaned forward again, abandoning his cards completely. His smirk was gone. His voice rose louder now, no longer hiding behind jokes. "You come into my house, sit in that chair, and think you can humiliate me? You don't run this stage, Stephen." "I do." Colbert's grin sharpened. He spread his hands wide, leaning casually in his chair. "Then why does it look like you're the guest on your own show right now?" The audience howled. Jimmy's face flushed. He gripped his desk tightly, his knuckles white. He raised his hand as if to quiet the crowd, but his voice cracked slightly as he tried to speak. "You think this is funny? You think this makes you look smart? All you're doing is proving you're desperate for attention." Colbert leaned in closer, his voice dropping, pointed. "No, Jimmy. All I'm doing is saying out loud what everyone else already knows." The crowd gasped, some clapping wildly, others shouting. The tension was unbearable now. Jimmy slammed his fist lightly on the desk, his voice booming. "You don't get to come here and disrespect me. Not on my stage, not on my show." Colbert stood suddenly, pushing his chair back with a scrape. The audience shrieked. Some gasped, others clapped. He pointed at Jimmy, his smirk twisting into something colder. "Your stage? Your show? Jimmy, it barely is a show anymore."
"That's why I'm here, because nobody else wanted the slot." The eruption from the crowd was deafening.
Gasps, screams, claps, a pure chaos. Jimmy rose halfway from his chair, his face red, his voice trembling with fury. "That's it. That's enough!" Colbert laughed, leaning across the desk, his voice loud enough to drown the crowd. "What are you gonna do, Jimmy? Kick me out? On your first night back?" That'd look great for ratings. The words stung. Jimmy's lips pressed together, his fists tight against the desk. His eyes darted to the audience, then to the producers frantically waving off stage. For a moment he said nothing, just silence. Then slowly, he leaned into the mic, his voice low but sharp. "You're a guest here, Stephen. Start acting like it, or you're done." The audience shrieked again, the tension unbearable. Colbert leaned back, crossing his arms, his grin wide. "Then maybe I'm already done." The room roared, the crowd splitting into cheers and boos. The energy was volcanic. The escalation was complete. Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert were no longer trading jokes. They were fighting for dominance, live in front of millions. And it was clear. Only one of them would walk away with the stage. The studio was shaking with noise. Audience members leaned out of their seats, some clapping and screaming, others booing and shouting for calm. The cameras swung frantically, zooming wide, then snapping tight on the two men locked in a duel that was no longer playful, no longer scripted, no longer safe. Jimmy Kimmel's face was red, his smirk gone, his fists pressed against the desk. His voice cracked as he tried to regain control. "Sit down," he barked. "We're not turning this into a circus. Sit down and act like a guest." Stephen Colbert didn't move. He stood tall, his hands in his pockets, his smirk sharper than ever. "Act like a guest?" he repeated slowly, letting the words drip with sarcasm. "Jimmy, I've hosted this kind of show for years. I know how this works. The host makes jokes, the guest laughs politely, but the difference between us is simple. My audience laughs with me. Yours laughs at you, The audience shrieked, half in cheers, half in disbelief. Gasps rippled across the room, some covering their mouths, others screaming louder. Jimmy's face twitched, his lips curling into something closer to a snarl than a smile. He slammed his palm on the desk, the sound cracking like a gunshot across the studio. "That's it. You don't come here and talk to me like that. Not here. Not tonight." Colbert leaned forward, jabbing a finger toward him, his voice rising. "Then stop pretending you're in control, Jimmy. You lost this stage the moment I walked out here." The crowd exploded. Wild cheers, boos, whistles, stomping feet. Some were chanting Colbert's name, others shouting for Jimmy, the energy boiling into chaos. The band sat frozen, their instruments untouched. The producers offstage waved frantically, signaling to the cameramen to keep rolling no matter what. Jimmy rose from his chair, his chest heaving, his voice louder now, shaking with anger. "Security!" he shouted, his words booming across the room. "Get him out of here!" The audience gasped in unison. Colbert laughed loud and sharp, throwing his arms wide. "Oh, there it is. The big move. Kick me off because you can't handle me. That's your idea of comedy, Jimmy?" Call the guards and cut to commercial. The roar of the crowd hit a fever pitch. People jumped out of their seats, clapping wildly, booing furiously, shouting over one another. The camera zoomed tighter on Jimmy's face, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing. Security guards in black shirts appeared from the wings, moving quickly toward the stage. The audience screamed louder. The tension was unbearable, volcanic. Colbert leaned over the desk one last time, his voice low but clear, picked up perfectly by the microphone. "Jimmy, you should have stayed canceled." The words detonated like a bomb. The crowd erupted. Gasps, screams, whistles, the sound shaking the rafters. Jimmy froze, his face pale for a split second, then twisted in rage. He pointed at Colbert, his voice cracking as he shouted, "Out! Get him out, now!" The guards closed in, their hands out cautiously. Colbert stood tall, raising his arms in mock surrender, smirking wider than ever. "Careful, boys," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Wouldn't want to hurt the fragile host's feelings." The audience howled again. The studio was chaos incarnate. The guards moved closer, surrounding Colbert. He didn't fight. He didn't resist. He let them guide him. But his voice carried over the roar of the crowd, sharp and mocking. "Remember this moment, folks. Jimmy Kimmel, the host who couldn't handle a guest." The audience screamed louder. Some cheered wildly, clapping and stomping their feet. Others booed, shouting for order. The cameras zoomed wide, catching the entire spectacle. Colbert being led off stage. Jimmy standing at his desk, gripping the edges so tightly his knuckles whitened. His face twisted with fury. Jimmy tried to speak, his voice trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not how we do things here." But the crowd drowned him out. Boos, cheers, whistles, laughter. The sound was relentless. He tried again, his words cracking. Let's get back on track." The noise swallowed him whole. The producers offstage waved desperately, signaling to cut the feed. The cameraman swung in one last time, capturing the split screen. Colbert smirking as he disappeared into the wings. Jimmy rattled and pale, his smile gone completely. The noise swelled louder, hitting its peak. The audience was on its feet, shouting, clapping, screaming. Jimmy sat down slowly, his hands trembling on the desk, his lips pressed tight, his voice lost in the storm. And then the feed dropped. No outro, no applause, no polished closing line, just a cold, abrupt cut to black. The final image burned into millions of screens. Stephen Colbert being escorted off stage, grinning, his words still echoing, while Jimmy Kimmel sat rattled and humiliated at his desk, his comeback show collapsing live before the world.